So Battle Partners has been legal in Japan for almost a week, coming up to a week, and while the format still has time to develop and solidify itself on what decks are good and what decks are bad, we of course, with a new rotation, have some new decks coming into the fray now that old ones have left the game. And in this video we're going to be talking about one of the trainers Pokemon. I know they actually are seeing play, even if it's like not the highest tier decks, but they are still seeing a decent amount of play and a decent amount of success. I'm going to talk about one that in my partner's video I said was one of the weakest, but I was mainly talking about the cards combined. This card by itself is actually pretty good, that being Lillie's Clefairy. For those of you who don't know what it does, it has the Fairy Zone ability that makes the weakness of each dragon Pokemon your opponent has now Psychic ×2, and it itself is a Psychic type. So it basically gives a dragon Pokemon a weakness, because dragon Pokemon don't have a weakness and they also don't have a resistance, which is why they're so powerful in some instances. And then its attack Full Moon Rondo does 20 damage, but also does 20 more damage for each benched Pokemon in play, both yours and your opponent's. So if you have a full bench and your opponent has a full bench, you can do a maximum of 220 damage, which is pretty decent. And if you're up against a dragon deck, that is obviously weakness, so you'll be doing 440, which obviously is a one-hit KO. In my Battle Partners Trainers Pokemon set review video, I mentioned that this card is very similar to Palkia with its Subspace Swell, except Subspace Swell did 60 damage plus 20 more damage, so it could do a maximum of 260, which is a lot better. You also have other Pokemon with like those kinds of bench hitting attacks, like you have Terapagos, but that only does damage based on your bench. And then there's also other Pokemon such as Entei, Suicune V and Raikou V, which had a very similarly named attack, which did the exact same thing, 20 damage plus 20 more damage for each benched Pokemon. Raikou V is currently seeing a lot of play inside of Miraidon decks because you can make use of Pikachu with Area 0, and that is exactly how people are playing Clefairy. But the main difference with Clefairy is that they're playing it alongside Teal Mask Ogerpon, which Teal Dance ability lets you attach a basic grass energy from your hand to draw one card. And because it's a Terra Pokemon, you can then make use of Area 0 Underdepths, meaning that your maximum bench size is now 8, so you can do an additional 60 damage, bringing you up to 280, which is also a pretty decent amount. It can one-hit KO most basic EX Pokemon, and even a couple of Evolution EX Pokemon, and again if you're up against a Dragon deck, then you can just one-hit KO even without Area 0. Now you're probably thinking, how are you supposed to get to the grass energy onto your Clefairy when it requires 2 energy? Well, this deck plays very similarly. It's sort of a combination between Raging Bolt and Regidrago. You're basically using Clefairy EX as your main attacker, and then Teal Mask Ogerpon as your way to get energy into play. So you obviously bench Teal Mask Ogerpon, and if you can get Area 0 Underdepths, then you can bench even more Pokemon, because the deck plays quite an abundance of different Pokemon. You have stuff like Latias EX, which can give all your Pokemon free retreat since we only play basics. We have Squawkabilly, so we can discard our hand and draw a fresh hand of 6. Iron Bundle, in case we want to force a Pokemon out of the active. Mimikyu, in case we want to stall for a few turns. Mew as a free retreater in case we don't have Latias and it lets us draw cards. Badoo, because Badoo is Badoo. So on and so forth. Fezandipiti to draw cards, and so on. Some lists have even been playing another new card from Battle Partners, that being Volcanion EX, and its ability says that if it's in the active spot, you can burn your opponent's active Pokemon. So if you're just shy of hitting a knockout, this can add on that extra 20 damage that you may need. Very interesting card that's very similar to the likes of Petrant with its Toxic Subjugation ability. So this deck's main plan obviously is to get Clefairy into play, Teal Mask Ogerpon into play, and maybe cycle through your deck with all these support Pokemon, Latias into play, Fezandipiti into play. Basically you want to fill up your bench with Area 0 Underdepths in play, and then attach a Psychic energy and energy switch a Grass energy onto Clefairy and start attacking. The only real big issue with this deck is Clefairy EX itself. It's very frail, 190 HP, meaning that it can be KO'd very easily by a lot of Pokemon. It does have the benefit of having a metal weakness, so against decks like Charizard, you'll need to have taken one prize card in order for them to hit the amount of damage they need to knock you out, otherwise they'll only be doing 180. And because Clefairy EX is so frail, it's very easy for your opponent to just knock it out, and then knock it out, and then knock it out. But Clefairy EX has a very powerful tool card that actually alleviates kind of its low HP cost, and that is Lillie's Pearl, which says that if it's attached to a Lillie's Pokemon and that Pokemon is KO'd, your opponent takes one less prize card. So with Lillie's Pearl attached to your Lillie's Clefairy EX, it basically becomes a one prize Pokemon, which is a lot more convenient given that it has a low amount of HP. So instead of trading 2 prizes with your opponent each time you attack, you're getting 2 prizes depending on what you knock out, and your opponent is only getting 1 prize. Granted, they could bring up one of your other support Pokemon as they also have a low amount of HP, Mew EX, Guacamole EX, even Volcanion only has 220 HP. So while your Lillie's Clefairy is a 1 prize attacker that, if not dealt with, is just going to threaten you next turn, you also play abundance of support Pokemon that are also very, very frail. Another thing to note about this deck is that it does have good matchups against some of the best decks currently in Japan. Again, we're only in the first week, so those could change here and there, but at the moment the best decks in Japan are conveniently both Dragon Pokemon, Dragapult and Raging Bolt. So this deck has a pretty good matchup against those decks, able to one-hit KO Dragapults and Raging Bolts without needing to commit too much bench space. Dragapult has 320 HP, so you only need to bench 6 Pokemon. They could be 5 of your opponent's Pokemon and 1 of your Pokemon. And then against Raging Bolt, it's kind of the same thing. You don't really need to have that much bench space, plus Raging Bolt likes to bench pretty much the exact same Pokemon that Clefairy benches, so you could just bench a couple, your opponent has a bench couple, then you can just knock out, knock out, knock out. The only matchups this deck kind of struggles against is other high HP, EX Pokemon. Charizard, for example, it doesn't do the ×2 weakness, and the max amount it can hit is 280. That's if your opponent has committed a full bench. Because if they haven't, and they're very aware of that, they'll probably not want to bench that many Pokemon. It's going to lower your damage down. Milotic EX, that's kind of annoying because Lillie's Clefairy is a basic EX with an ability, so you could just put Cornerstone Mask into play or Farigiraf EX into play, and now you basically can't attack. Goldengo has weakness over it, so it only has to discard a couple of energy to get rid of it. Same thing with Archlodon and Hops Zacian. You get the idea. The deck is strong, if a little bit iffy when it comes to specific matchups, and that's probably why it's not doing a whole lot over in Japan as a standalone deck. But the card itself is seen play inside of other decks as basically a counter to the top tier decks. Even the top tier deck, Dragapult, is playing Clefairy because Dragapult plays Psychic Energy, so if you're up against a mirror match or you're up against Raging Bolt, you basically have an advantage. Gardevoir has also been playing it to give all of their Psychic Pokemon a ×2 weakness against Dragapult and Raging Bolt. The card isn't just good in a deck, but it's also good as a standalone card. Some Charizard lists have even been playing it and then, taking in like a couple of Psychic Energy so they can actually fulfill the attack cost. It's a very interesting card and also a very interesting deck that, depending on what support we get in the future, could become even better, and also depending on what Dragon Pokemon we get in the future, this card may become more splashable in specific decks in order to counteract those Dragon threats. But overall, this deck is pretty decent. It reminds me a lot of Regidrago, the fact that you're using Teal Mask Ogerpon as a draw support, but not only that, it's also facilitating your energy costs. It also reminds me a lot of Palkia, how you basically kind of play mind games with your opponent, because if they end up benching a bunch of stuff, you're just doing more damage. So you're basically I have this Pokemon in the active that does more damage when you commit more bench space, so if you commit more bench space, I can knock you out, but if you don't commit more bench space, I can't knock you out, but you're also going to be behind in terms of advantage. At the moment, with just how powerful stuff like Dragapult, Raging Bolt, Charizard and all those kind of decks are, plus the fact that we have 3 metal decks in the format and this Pokemon has a metal weakness, already pretty frail. Yes, you can put it down to 1 prize card given instead of 2. It's still not the most ideal deck to play, but I imagine it probably might get better over time. It just highly depends, but I can definitely see the card being splashed inside of other decks for the time being, as long as Dragon Pokemon reign supreme as the best decks in the format. And that is it for the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, what you think about Lillie's Clefairy EX as a standalone card as well as a deck. Will you be picking up this card? I might do, since I'm not really sure what I want to play post-rotation. I obviously do have Dragapult, and Dragapult is doing very well over in Japan, but I kind of want to play a fresh deck for a fresh format. I'll see. I might still keep Dragapult around, but I do kind of want to play something different. But I definitely will be picking up a copy of this card for my Dragapult deck. as it basically helps with the mirror match and any other dragon decks we see in the future. Make sure to like, comment and subscribe, all of that nonsense, and I will see you in the next video, whatever that may be. Take care.